as Joe Biden prepares to step into the White House in mid-January. The president-elect has been on the phone with leaders from around the world, starting with America's closest allies to seek their cooperation in countering security threats as well as the COVID-19 pandemic and environmental challenges. Biden spoke with South Korean President Moon Jae-in on Thursday, calling Seoul a linchpin for the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region. To break down how the South Korea-US alliance will move forward with a new US administration, we're joined by David Tizard, Professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. It's lovely to see you again.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. And now joining us from Washington, D.C. is Joseph Bosco, former China Country Director in the U.S. Office of the Secretary of Defense and a contributor to The Hill. It's lovely to have you back on the show as well.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again and be here.
Well, let's start with you, Dr. Tizard. Now, starting with President Moon and President-elect Joe Biden's phone call on Thursday, where they both reaffirmed their commitment to their bilateral alliance, which was quite rocky during the Trump administration, as he constantly complains about President Trump constantly complains about South Korea's contribution towards shared defense costs, asking for a 50% increase, as well as questioning the presence of US troops on the Korean Peninsula. But then, so we are expecting the Biden administration to relatively improve ties there, but he does have quite a lot of work to do in terms of rebuilding America's relationship with traditional allies. So how committed do you think he will be to the ROK-US alliance, and how do you think Biden would settle the issue of defense costs?
I think in terms of defense costs and the issue of the ROK-US alliance, it's going to be a lot more diplomatic now. We're going to see a lot more language, communication that is formal, that is well-meaning, because one of the things about President Trump's administration for the past 4 years has not necessarily been his financial demands, which have been at times outrageous and outlandish numbers pulled out of nowhere. But one thing that's really hit the South Koreans from my perspective is that President Trump has continually made derogatory and disparaging comments towards the South Koreans, and this goes towards members of their National Assembly, towards their culture, or even going so far as to criticize Parasite, the movie. This bellicose language has really damaged the relationship. For President Moon, President Trump has been a useful ally in terms of inter-Korean relations, but in terms of Korea's global position in the world, in terms of how it's perceived by other countries, President Trump was continually disparaging South Korea and South Koreans. What we've seen from President-elect Joe Biden is he has put op-eds in national Korean newspapers. He's gone to social media and congratulated South Korea on their national holiday. So while the intricacies and specifics of costs and troop sharing might be played out by experts behind closed doors that we're not privy to, I think the language on the diplomatic front in public is going to be a lot nicer, and it's going to be a lot more positive towards South Korea and its citizens.
Why isn't President-elect Joe Biden, we've already seen him pay his respects to veterans of the Korean War on Veterans Day in America, so some very encouraging signs there. And now, Dr. Bosco, what do you think are some critical steps that Joe Biden needs to take to really strengthen the South Korea-US alliance, and how do you think Biden would approach the issue of defense costs?
Well, I certainly agree with Dr. Tizard in terms of the stylistic changes that will in the diplomatic approach that will be taken by the Biden administration as compared to the Trump people. Although I would make one distinction, that is between what President Trump himself has said and done in terms of disparaging remarks about South Korea and other allies for that matter, and what the administration substantively is doing in terms of working with the South Koreans. Is a very strong, pervasive alliance that exists between the two countries, and nothing will change that. So Biden has a strong situation that he will be coming into office with. In fact, the fact that he's not Trump and doesn't say the kinds of things that Trump says is obviously a plus for him. I think he will not, although there will be discussion of sharing of costs, it will certainly not be in the range of quintuple amounts that President Trump was demanding, nor will we see comments about pulling U.S. troops out of South Korea. So I think the overall tone and atmosphere will be different. substantively, the Trump-Biden administration will probably be pretty close to what the Trump administration is, which is a very loyal and grateful ally to have South Korea as a friend.
Right, hopefully we'll see a very solid, consistent message from the new President Biden when he takes office regarding the bilateral alliance. And Dr. Bosco, many believe that Susan Rice is going to be Secretary of State and Michelle Flournoy is going to be Defense Secretary of the Biden administration. How experienced and committed do you think they are in terms of strengthening America's military alliance with South Korea?
I think both have reputations for being relatively mainstream or even conservative on national security issues. So I think that we won't see a serious deviation from existing policy again with those people, assuming they're the actual nominees. We don't know that for sure. But I think that they're both experienced Washington hands. They've been around. They know the national security situation. They know the issues and they know the players. And I think overall they would be competent players.
Now, Dr. Tizard, well, as you mentioned, it seems quite obvious that President Trump didn't have as much care for South Korea or building a relationship with President Moon Jae-in as he did with Shinzo Abe, for instance. You've mentioned how you think the diplomacy between South Korea and America is likely to improve under the Biden administration. But do you also see relations improving also with Japan and between South Korea and Japan, as America has been a very key driver of regional cooperation here in East Asia?
I'm not sure that any US president, administration, or advisors can really affect or move South Korea-Japan relations. This is a very rocky road. There have been reports this week that South Korea is going to spend $500 million and take 2 to 3 years to change a portrait of Admiral Lee Sun-shin, which is on the 100 won coin, the Baek won coin, which has been there since 1973. They're going to replace it with a new one because it was painted originally by a Japanese collaborator, a Korean. But you can see that this issue between Japan and South Korea and Japan, still resonates deeply with the Korean public. And I'm not sure that any administration from the United States will be able to move that in a meaningful way. President Obama greatly encouraged the 2015 Comfort Women Agreement, which was signed by then President Park Geun-hye and Shinzo Abe, which was meant to sort of bring an end to this tumultuous and tragic history between the two countries. Of course, Vice President Biden was part of that Obama administration. Since taking office, South Korean President Moon has torn up that agreement, essentially, and promised to eradicate deep-rooted evils. So I don't personally see President-elect Biden coming in and being able to solve any sort of South Korea-Japan relationship. To me, it seems to be becoming rockier as time goes by, and despite my personal wishes, I see that continuing into the future.
Very difficult problem to solve. And well, Dr. Bosco, would you say the need is greater than ever for South Korea, the US, and countries like Australia and Japan to really cooperate on balancing powers like China? Do you think the Biden administration is going to be rather tough on Beijing?
That is a very, very important and open question, frankly, among some of us in the United States. The record of Vice President Biden over the years is not the most encouraging one in terms of his firmness in dealing with the existential threat coming from communist China. So there much remains to be seen there. Obviously, the team that he assembles will be an important factor. We talked about a couple of people. There are others. There's a mixed record there in terms of what policy from the United States toward China will make sense. As I said, much remains to be seen on that. Some of us are cautiously optimistic. Some of us are cautiously pessimistic. That will be up to the vice president. Going back to the earlier point, though, that you were discussing on the comfort women issue and the rocky relationship between Japan and South Korea, there's been a consistent thread, whether it's the Obama administration or the Clinton administration or the Trump administration, the Bush administration as well, to get these two allies to work these problems out and get them behind us. As we once said, the saying might be applied to them, the ally of my ally is my enemy. That's not a healthy situation when we've got external threats from both North Korea and China for Japan and South Korea not to be working in greater harmony, as well as being part of a larger group with the United States and maybe other countries in the region, Australia, even India at some point. So there's a coming together needed among many countries in the region, and Japan and South Korea have got to work out their issues and put history behind them at some point.
Well, the Biden transition team has been very busy getting Joe Biden on the phone with world leaders, especially with those in the Indo-Pacific region, without the State Department's help, apparently, as the Trump administration is refusing to cooperate. But Dr. Bosco, with the gridlock in Congress, also the cut in next year's defense budget and just trillions of dollars pouring into the COVID-19 stimulus, as well as the Democrats' rather strong transatlantic orientation, do you think Biden's administration would prioritize America's NATO alliance over the Indo-Pacific region when it comes down to it?
That's one of the concerns that people have expressed, and again, it remains to be seen, but hopefully they will recognize that the greatest threats, the greatest urgency ought to be in the Indo-Pacific region. And the interesting thing is that even the Europeans, our NATO allies and others in Europe, the European Union, are focusing more on the Asia-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific, than they had been until even last year. And I think part of it is because of the pandemic and the way that China has behaved on so many issues. But they are coming together, and there's been a recent series of meetings in Europe by Pompeo and the National Security Advisor and the Deputy National Security Advisor, Matt Pottinger, meeting with the Europeans to discuss a coordinated, united front to deal with these threats from the Indo-Pacific. So whether there's an initial bias toward Europe from the Biden administration, I think the reality will eventually compel them to focus on the Indo-Pacific, particularly Northeast Asia.
And Dr. Tizard, so Moon and Biden, they spoke on the phone yesterday and they agreed on a lot of things. It was quite seemed like a very optimistic kind of conversation. Do you see them really collaborating more on global challenges other than security, also climate change and COVID-19, for instance?
Definitely, there will be a lot more talk of collaboration. There's going to be the language, as I said earlier, is going to change. Climate change and COVID-19 aren't going away anytime soon. I think it would be good if the West, the United States, the West more broadly, had a look at South Korea and its response, had a look at Taiwan, what Taiwan is doing in response in terms of COVID-19. From reports this week, Taiwan have been left out of the WHO's meeting on COVID responses at the request of China. So we see politics is still playing a role in these issues when people's health and safety should be coming to the fore. What personally really interests me in terms of President Moon and President-elect Biden is how they approach issues more socially and culturally, because President-elect Biden in his speeches has espoused human rights, respect for minorities and such forth. That's been a consistent message and a response to the Trump administration's rather neglect for such issues. Domestically in South Korea, President Moon has not really addressed any of these. We're still waiting for the abortion law to be changed, which was requested by the Constitutional Court last year. Anti-discrimination laws aren't supported by the current administration. And then we have the worrying human rights situations that we continuously see in China, as Mr. Bosco has mentioned. But then as well with Hong Kong, I'm very interested to see whether President-elect Biden is going to take these values that he espouses domestically and applies them to this region, because if he does that, he will find lots of conflict and differences of opinion, not only with China, but I believe also with South Korea. So it's whether those values that President Biden is espousing, whether they transcend his national boundaries.
And Dr. Tizard, South Korea, well, it's always had to tread very carefully when it comes to handling relations with its biggest ally, the United States, and its major trading partner, China. Do you think it's going to face the similar kind of pressure from the Biden government to really pick a side?
I think, yeah, Mr. Bosco has mentioned this, that there are allies. South Korea and the United States are allies. They have a military alliance. They've fought in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. This, I believe, is going to be cemented. In domestic politics in South Korea, there's often the conversation of movement, President Moon's movement towards China. This seems to me like conservative ideological bashing. However, I don't think there's much realistic chance that President Moon's administration will side with China over the United States. Will there be a desire to bring South Korea closer to the United States? Yes. Will that be a good thing? From my personal position, yes.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we're going to have to end the discussion today, as we're out of time. But that was David Tizard, Professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University, and Joseph Bosco, former China Country Director in the US Office of the Secretary of Defense and contributor to The Hill, both joining us from Seoul and Washington, D.C. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Dr. Tizard.
Thank you, Mr. Bosco.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching.